Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, Hortense. Welcome to Santiago de Compostela. First of all, I'd like to thank the City of Culture for organizing this event and for having invited me to share the panel with Hortense. This is a pleasure. Thank you, Angelis. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Marta. Thank you, Sylvia. So good morning, Hortense. It's a great pleasure for us to have you here with us in this meeting for discussion. I would like to thank you on behalf of the part in this forum. We're speaking now, during this session, about the Festival of Aviñón, an international event that was founded in 1947. So it's been around for some time now, uninterruptedly, starting with Jean Villard, the first director. It started representing Richard II by William Shakespeare. Shakespeare was practically unknown back then in France. In the Pope's palace, in the courtyard, and that was the focal point for the festival for a long time. Nowadays, it's one of the most important international manifestations of live shows, live festivals, and every month of July, Aviñón is the city for theatre. There have been four major stages between 1947 and 63, then 64 to 79, 1980 to 2003, and 2004 to 2013. It is during this last stage that we're going to focus, because it's the one that Hortense has been in charge of managing together with Vincent Baudrillier. They have co-directed and reorientated this meeting point for the performing arts. Each one of the stages that I mentioned had a different directorate. About Hortense Archambault, she's very young, and yet she has a long established career. She received an MA in History of Art at the Sorbonne University in Paris in 1993, and a Master's in Cultural Management from the University Paris-Dauphine in 1994. In 1994, she also started to work at the Aviñón Festival as a production assistant with Vincent Baudrillier. In 1995, she was appointed manager of the Théâtre de l'Opprimé. This is Augusto Boal's theatre company. From 1995 to 1999, she was the manager of the Établissement du Parc and the Grand Hall de la Villette in Paris. In 1999, she goes back to the Festival de Aviñón as administrative director. And in 2003, she was appointed with Vincent Baudrillier as co-director. This year's edition was their last edition, and in order to give them some charm in French, with some poetry and some beauty, they brought together artists who had already been present at the festival, and they had a one-night séance, re-inviting artists like Guy Cassier, Jean Fabre, and Alain Platel, who were part of this single closing function. I think that Hortense will raise many interesting topics. And apart from her contribution to the festival, there is the redirection and also the protagonism given in the platform to new young artists, and a specific approach every year with guest creators, guest artists who gave a special feel to the festival during the 10 years in which Hortense and Vincent were co-directing. So I'd like to give the floor to Hortense, and if we have time after that, we shall have some questions and answers, comments, whatever you will. And we shall see if then we have some coffee after that. So you have the Hortense. Thank you very much for this introduction. Thank you very much for having invited me. I'm sorry that I have to speak in French because my Spanish is absolutely nil and my English is very poor. And so I have given the opportunity to speak in my own language. I don't know whether I may be speaking too fast. Please, the interpreters could warn me. When I received the invitation to this forum, I was quite intrigued by the title, The Revolution of Artistic Festivals. And I found that such a title was quite formidable because it bears witness, on the one hand, to the trust of the capacity of art and showbiz to change the views that we have of the world and of our own selves. And for me, the idea of revolution, together with the idea of festival, marks two important phenomena around festivals, and that's festivals can not only be they cannot be stagnant. They are involved in a lot of movement. I assume that you have many other ideas, and what we heard yesterday, well, we're going to be hearing more about it today. So directing a festival, it's always trying to rethink the events that we direct and manage, and to tie them in with the times that we live. Moreover, the festival phenomenon has to be created at a time, at a period, and in a territory. So these are the things that I have been evoked by the title, together with the idea that at the end of the day, the festival phenomenon establishes a specific context, and it also changes the venue, the city where it's held. It also establishes a specific contact between the audience and the work, because we take a different look at the works if they are held in a festival, as opposed to in a closed venue like a museum or a theatre or a lecture. A festival is festive by definition. It brings together lots of people and it's in an unusual context. I think that this idea is what we have to do when we analyze a festival. It's a revolutionary phenomenon, and I thought that would be a very interesting approach. I'm going to speak about the festival in Avignon. I won't describe the 67 years of history, but I will go back to its establishment because it's very interesting. I'd like to say that Avignon is a small town in the south of France, some 100 kilometers north of Marseille on the Rhone River. It is quite unique because it was where the popes lived for some time in the 14th century. And so the town is very much marked, although it was a brief period. It really changed the town in terms of architecture. There are many churches and there's a huge palace where the popes lived. It's a national monument. And it's also surrounded by walls. So about 100,000 people live in Avignon, and the center of the town is surrounded by the city walls. And it takes less than 25 minutes to walk to one end to the other. So it's, so to speak, a very determined, very small geographical space. And nowadays, during the festival, it becomes a huge theatre scene. So the entire city of Avignon becomes a theatre. Lots of people come to the plays, but there are also discussions and other events where people exchange, where they get together, they meet. There are some very organized things and some informal ones. I spoke about the foundation in 1947. The start of the festival was called A Week of Art in Avignon. But right at the beginning, there was also a contemporary art exhibition. Two private collectors, a couple loaned their works that were exhibited in the Pope's Palace. And if we look at the catalogue, it's rather incredible, because we have great names of the early 20th century art. Matisse, Picasso, Calder, all of them were represented with their works, all inside the Pope's Palace. And this exhibition was marked by the end of the Second World War, because the resistance was very active there, and there were many violent events at the end of the war there. So the idea was to host a large exhibition of contemporary art and to ask for the war never to happen again. And in this humanist spirit, they thought that visual arts, but also the performing arts, would be the way to pursue peace. So it's mostly drama, theatre. And there's the French poet, René Charte, who lives close to Avignon. He was an important member of the French resistance. And there is also Jean Villard, who was just recently a successful author in Paris. Jean Villard, I suppose you know about him. Well, now Avignon is close to Paris, but in those days it was about 7 hours train ride. So he came down to Avignon, he visited the exhibition in the Pope's Palace, and there was the court of honor at the heart of the Pope's Palace. And so when he visited that, and he said that would be an ideal venue to stage a play. It would be difficult, but something had to be reinvented. So he came down with his company, and they played 3 different shows. The couple who hosted the exhibition thought it was a good idea, but they didn't have money to pay for it. So they decided to approach the mayor of Avignon, who guaranteed that they would pay for something if the ticket sales were not enough. So the mayor said, we'll take charge of all the expenses that are not covered by ticket sales. So right from the very beginning, and this is interesting, when the festival was born, we had a series of ingredients that are still there today. These are the problems that we have to rethink and reinterpret year after year edition. There is obviously the public funding that is also present. It's also a festival for creation, so we have to adapt the ways of funding to specific contexts. And it has to be adapted also to the architecture of the venue. There is also Villard's idea. It's a unique occasion to try to test an idea of popular theatre for large audiences. So there was a great will. In fact, the Court of Honor of the Pope's Palace is a very large space. So this creation was addressed to a large public, a large audience. Right from the beginning, there was also the idea of interdisciplinarism. It started as a theatre festival, but also tied together to the art exhibition. I've given you more or less in a few brush strokes how the festival was born. To understand how we, together with Vincent Braillard, have tried to reinterpret it with our project. So the features that I have brought forward, it's a creation festival. It's creation really much marked by the aesthetics of Jean Villard, who was from 1947 to 1964 the person responsible for hosting the theatre festival at the Pope's Palace in the courtyard for 3 weeks. Eventually, the Minister of Culture also brought forward the popular theatre of Chaillot, a company from Paris that continued to bring their plays and their performances to Avignon too. And one of the interesting features of this company was that in 1947, they were in their early 20s, and you had people like Jean Moreau, Philippe Noiret, and others who eventually became very important artists. And Jean-Philippe, who was not very well known at the time, also joined the company, but this is going to mark the image of the festival in the coming years. So this is where the festival more or less started, and Jean Villard built a relationship with the audiences the same way that he did at the National Popular Theatre in Chaillot, Paris. So he had used Avignon as a sort of a testing ground. This would be a new kind of theatre without programs. The attempt was to do it in a way that the audience could felt also involved in a sense of cultural democratization. They attempted to find ways to bring people to the theatre if they would normally not go. It also involved the works councils in several large companies. So this was a sort of a pedagogical idea. And the following day, after every play, they had a meeting where the audiences would get together to discuss with the artists. So it wasn't only about a one-way play, a one-way show. It was involving the audiences with interaction to see the evolution of the way in which the things were done. It was the idea of Jean Villard, who asked for written questions, and he would only reply to those that he found relevant. It was a rather solemn way of approaching things, but still he was involved with the festival, and eventually they changed this relationship with between the audiences and the artists. As I said, this is a festival for creation. We have seen with Vincent Brouillet. We also worked with the previous management team right at the heart of the festival. I was the administrative director, and Vincent was assistant to programming. And so we had the chance to also know how the previous management team was doing things, and we could also bring forward our own proposals. So eventually, as I said, there is also public funding for the festival, and the management is appointed for a mandate of 4 years by the French Minister of Culture and the Mayor of Avignon. So the previous director, Bernard Fédarcier, did not see his position renewed in 2002. So in 2002, Vincent Brouillet was thinking that we had to renew or renovate the festival with our propositions. We reflected together with the management board, but also looking at things from the outside to build this project that was eventually accepted and has been going on for 10 years now. This project is attached to accentuating the specificities of the festival. In 1947, which was one of the sole festivals of this kind in the world. Now there are many other ones, and it's very difficult to attract international artists to come to your festival every year. And so this was an incentive for us, because after all, it all ties in with the idea of a revolution of festivals, because the festival was born in a certain way, and in this kind of meetings is where we can exchange ideas to know how to go forward. Going back to Avignon, I have described what the town is like. It's a small town compared to the notoriety of the festival. It's only 100,000 inhabitants. It's a small town. The specificity of the town is also its location, its architecture, with many heritage buildings or listed buildings, many churches, cloisters, and then the Pope's Palace that I have spoken about already. There are also other buildings, but there is no industry, because after all, Avignon is not an industrial city. It's located in an agricultural, rural setting. We grow wine, and yesterday I also heard about Galician wine, which is very nice. So there is not an industrial background. So it's not similar to the festival in the Ruhr Valley in Germany that transforms the cities there into a theatre space. The open air spaces are actually the larger venues. In fact, there is an old stone quarry that was famous venues for the festival, with Peter Brook, who hosted a very interesting play there that marked a turning point for the festival as it took it outside of the city walls. The festival phenomenon makes audiences visit not one show only, but different shows. And the way things go, there can be many different shows on at the same time, and there is a sort of a mix, and so the audiences have to choose between one or the other. And so we thought it would be very important to reflect on how exactly we programmed all these different shows and events, so we didn't have clashing events that would prevent audiences from attending them. Our idea was to invite the audiences with proposals and make the audiences build their own stories and to create their own drama around the plays, considering that in itself each show, each performance has its features, but the overarching idea of the festival, considering that 1/3 of the audience lives in the area and the other 2/3 have to travel a lot, and it's a 4 or 5 day event, well, that they have to attend as many shows as possible. So bearing in mind this idea, we also reflected on the fact that the spectators were going to visit the city for the plays, but then there's the other idea, the idea of popularity. It's not a specialist or professionalized festival, it is, of course, made by professionals and artists, but for the people, it's a popular festival. It's for those people who really love theatre, but also other people who are not necessarily very much into theatre, but that they have to be also involved. This makes us reflect on how to different types of audience. Once again, I'd like to say that the festival has been built a long time, because we've had many different stages and directors, and it's now in its 7th edition. And every day we have to think of new ideas, which is ever more difficult in this day and age. When you try to change something, you need time for change. This is something that's always been so. The project that we have brought forward aimed at reinforcing a strong artistic line. We say that this is also the way to defend contemporary creation and also ask ourselves how artists represent the world today, how this complexity of the world in which we live, this complexity that we have to face, how to render it passionate enough in the way it's represented in a contemporary fashion to attract audiences, and how this would also allow us, considering another phenomenon that I mentioned, and that's the off-theatre, how to reaffirm the strong existence of the festival that is the official festival of Avignon, the Inn, but we've had a few years of the off now, and it's with artists who work and live in Avignon, and they start developing their own shows during the festival, but in their own venues. There are half a dozen companies that make these kind of shows, and nowadays there are about 100 venues. So it's a sort of a complementary or supplementary festival. And the off festival lacks programming. So these are self-productions by small companies. And there is a high diversity, as important as that of the inn theatre. And there are about 1,000 different shows, and none is the same as the other. This, of course, brings about transformation to the city, and this also accentuates this idea that the whole town, the whole city becomes a theatre. So from the viewpoint of the Festival of Aviñón, in order to have a clear line, we have to also reinforce our own artistic line. This artistic line is more or less parallel to the way in which the audiences develop. In other words, we cannot forsake the popular side to the festival. We have reflected on this, and we have decided to have a different programming every year to reinforce, in some cases, long-established artists at the heart of the festival. That's how we have created the idea of the associate artist. So we have two associated artists to inspire the programming, and they lie at the heart of the program of each edition. They also represent the image for the festival, to give a different colorfulness to each edition. They help us build the program, and together with Vincent, it's a way also not to fall back and forget that we need to find new things. Because these artists are always questioning things, and they also raise issues that we might not be aware of. And that means that at all times we have to be thinking on how to overcome all these obstacles. At the end of the day, it's a sort of a voyage in theatre, or a school where we learn as we share with the audiences. We've had 13 associate artists in 10 years. The first one was Thomas Stermayer in 2004. This was very important for us because he was the same age that we were, this artist. He was also responsible for an important cultural institution in Germany, and he was also, like many other artists, he belonged to a very vital artistic movement in Europe in the year 2000, within the scope of contemporary theatre. And so this was very interesting. I'm thinking of other artists such as Rodrigo Garcia, Romeo Castellucci, Thomas Stermayer. These are all different European artists who have maintained their own style with a very unique approach, but at the same time providing a sort of explosion of theatrical representation with a lot of stage and with different registers and different creations, because in France the theatrical tradition is very much sticking to the script, and these people have forsaken the written script, and they have played around with color, sound, image, light, all together enabling So this idea of associate artists is very simple as a device. 2 years before the edition, we start to engage with these associate artists, to become immersed in their universe, to see what they have been doing, who has taught them, what playwrights they are interested in, what other artists do they admire, what other artists they cannot stand. in order to more or less tailor the programming around the features of each festival edition. So this creates a sort of a constellation that we build around the artist. And for the artists, for the audiences, it's also interesting to attend one or other performance, because this will enrich their experiences from having approached this from a different viewpoint. And the discussion itself between the audiences and the artists is also enriched and becomes more interesting. Things have gone rather well. It has been difficult. We have had times in which this artistic revolution was difficult, especially with the press, who did not understand this new approach to the project. In 2005, for instance, there was a great scandal around the fact that Jan Fabre was the associate artist, because Jan Fabre is involved in visuals and dance and performance, and this is something very important for Aviñón. And those who were strictly into drama or theatre were very much impressed, and they were a bit scandalized at the fact that we had sort of perverted the reality of theatre. Nevertheless, it has a very important symbolic meaning, and it's also true that we have managed to shake or awaken the world of theatre in France by doing this kind of things. And that has given the Festival of Aviñón more renown. It's also interesting that we have been reinforced precisely after this crisis, because many artists have finally understood that the times they are changing, and the festival is always reinventing itself. It's not a question of just acknowledging that we had made a mistake, because we hadn't made a mistake, really. In fact, the artists themselves that would not have come to Aviñón otherwise have found that they did have a way to express their differences there too. Of course, there are also other political issues that are somewhat complicated. But after all, this is a festival for creation, and it has this component. Back in 2004, we had a cycle called the Theatre of Ideas that was also inspired by the discussions by Esther Meyer, because this is very common in Berlin. Every last Sunday of the month there is a philosopher or a sociologist that holds a lecture at their headquarters. So this was an interesting concept in the sense of having the program or the theme of the festival revolving around this theme with these ideas that were placed in the program. So these discussions would then be based on the theatre of ideas, involving philosophers, sociologists, historians, to bring them before the audience. This was also very successful. This venue, in fact, was held at a venue that was not an auditorium or a theatre, it was a garden. And we have had always between 300 and 1,000 members of the audience. As I said, all these different elements in the festival are the ones that render it unique. In this case, if a philosopher delivers a lecture, then someone else may want to go to a drama play. And that's the richness and variety that we have. So the first decision when we wanted to accentuate the specificity of our festival was to be installed in Aviñón. This in itself in France is a bit revolutionary, because if you want culture that is for the elite, that'll be always in Paris. Whatever you want to do, it has to be in Paris. So for the first time, we managed to make Avignon become live with world-class artists that had not necessarily performed in Paris before. Because after all, Avignon is in the south, it has this special architecture, the special light of the Mediterranean, and this also added to the creations. And in fact, this has made us reflect also on what kind of audiences, because throughout the year, other than the festival, there is not much art or culture in Avignon, and by no means within the lines of contemporary proposals that are brought about by the festival. There may be other events that have a more traditional aspect, but when it comes to contemporary art and creation, it is the festival. So we wanted more or less maintain this throughout the year for all the citizens of Avignon to work for the festival. And so we included other experiences throughout the year, such as a monthly meeting. If an artist is going to perform in the festival in July, then we ask them to come a couple of months before to deliver a lecture or to have a discussion or other types of events. The idea is to tie the citizens of Avignon as an audience to the creative process of the festival as a whole. This is the way we have been doing it in the last there is a financial issue. It's always very tricky. It's difficult to attend the festival if you don't have the money. You have to pay the trip there, the hotel. And yet those who live in Avignon have an opportunity to attend the festival without getting involved in such expenses. And the University of Avignon also has a laboratory of sociologists that is researching into other festivals, such as the one in Cannes or other cities. And they have also aided us because there are more professionals in this field that are also attending the festival. Especially among the more educated classes, but still we cater for everyone. And it is within this logic of focusing on the local, on the implementation in the territory, and to continue to work throughout the year on the local audience and to make it more accessible. Otherwise, we would be building barriers that would be counterproductive. And we follow up on the artists to help them reinvent themselves too. And this idea of the associate artist is a very novel thing, and it has allowed us to also engage in new adventures. I'm thinking of Joseph Nanch, a choreographer from Hungary who lives in France, and he was the associate artist in 2006. He hosted a large show in which many things were represented, and he wanted to dance before a painting of Michel Barcelot. He was a friend of Michel Barcelot, by the way, so it was easy for him to get a copy of the picture, a photograph, and I said, well, okay, if you arrange to get the picture, then do it. And so the dance was a paso doble, a Spanish dance, in front of a clay sculpture based on the work that Michel Barcelot did at the cathedral in Palma. So it had this other visual effect. It was something atypical and very strange, but at the same time it describes this relationship of confidence between the artist and the festival, because the festival had its production means in order to approach this and help the artists. And there was the opportunity of bringing the audience something new, saying this is an encounter between two artists. It's going to be a different type of performance. It can be a show, it can be visual art. We don't really know. And a lot of people came with this expectation, and it was really magic. When we had Romeo Castellucci as an associate artist, we asked him, what did you want to do? And he said he wanted to play the Divine Comedy. So he hosted 3 shows with a specific installation in Aviñón, in a small chapel. It was a 3-minute show. This is just to say that we have tried to reflect on what to do, because at the end of the day, the festival is always at the same venue, but still we can develop new things, different things. We can have a 2-hour show where hundreds of people go, and then we can have very tiny events that are also connected to this context that I mentioned. And I think that it's all connected to the underlying liveliness of the festival. As I said, we have developed the capacity of being producers. The festival has 12 million euros as a budget, but an important part of this budget is paid by the ticket sales. There are some 25 theaters. The expenses. The expenses are to refurbish and set up the theaters and also the courtyard in the Avignon's palace. So every time from April onwards, there's this huge crane that goes to the palace, and at night they set up the stage and the seats. And 1/3 of the budget is paid in that. And compared to other festivals that are held in large cities or in capital cities, for instance, the Ruhr Valley Festival that I mentioned, it's clear that we cannot keep up with the funding in Aviñón. So we have to offset the budget gaps with other funding. And we have to be very creative in our ideas in order to engage these artists that visit us. Another strong point for Aviñón is undoubtedly the audiences, the public. Most of the artists are very glad to be there, to meet the public, because of this exchange, the opportunity that they have with the audiences. And it's during the discussions and the lectures, this interaction with the audience, that they are also enriched, because they can find controversial opinions and different ways of expressing their emotions, but this is also good to learn. This also requires a lot of hard work on behalf of the festival management, and at the end of the day, there was a lot of passion in it, and we learned a lot from it. So this dual idea of accentuating the capacity for production at the festival, and also of continuing to work with the audiences and the ways in which we may integrate them into the creative process, has translated for us into the desire to host in Aviñón a site for repetition, because as I said, there's no specific venue for the festival each year. We have meetings with the audiences in different locations around the town. The idea is to build a venue that would become the factory of the show factory, and this would also be a place to have crews all year round and artists all year round to engage the local audiences. This idea of repetition would help us also involve the citizens of Avignon further into the creative process. And this will be a way to change the viewpoint of the audiences. The audiences are not just there to see something packaged and closed. It's something that they may be able to follow up throughout the year. Because they become a part of the history of the entire project, and they have a different approach to it. And it's not just a finished good, a finished packaged thing. We managed finally to open this factory last year in the summer. And it's also provided us the opportunity for residents to have resident contemporary art. This was built in one of the neighborhoods that we would call a sensitive neighborhood, a sort of marginalized neighborhood outside of the city center. And the whole process of building this center was very interesting, because we wanted, some people were complaining because it cost 2 million euros, and this is in a rather run-down neighborhood, and the people were complaining that they had other needs and not necessarily a large conference hall or something. But it was also important for us to be able to explain what we were doing, because it was a way of also promoting the neighborhood. Because we had to give publicity to the Avignon Festival. So this was hard work that we were involved. We had to involve all the neighborhood associations. The idea was to, once the factory was operational, to open its doors to local artists, even in the neighborhood, and to create an interesting social mix, bringing together the people from the center of the city to those in the neighborhood. So little by little we have become engaged with this neighborhood. And for the first time we have had a resident company. It's called the Group F. It's an internationally renowned company because it's also involved into fireworks. They are involved in the fireworks of the Olympic Games, or around the Eiffel Tower, or on the 14th of July, or when the Dubai Towers were opened. But besides the firework thing that they do, that is excellent, they are also involved in drama with characters that mix fireworks, sound, theatre. And they have these lighted characters. It's a very interesting show, and we have helped them in becoming established there. It's an international company based in France, but it has a composer from Chicago, members from Australia, and they also hold workshops with the local residents. They have also been involved in organizing this show to open the festival, with the lighting, the sound, the fireworks. And I think that's about it. I'm sorry that I didn't bring any images, any pictures, but I do have here a brochure in French with some pictures of the Fabrica, this art factory, so you can see what it's all about.
En fait, là, j'ai dit tout ce que je voulais.
Well, I've said all that I had to say, I think. This has been an interesting picture of the Aviñón Festival. I'm sure that you may have now lots of questions and comments to start a discussion. We can have a round of Q&A now.
Sí, te me salió una palabra.
Buenos días.
Good morning. My question is, could you insist on what happened in the controversy in 2005 when you started to bring in visual arts and it was a more multidisciplinary festival? I'd like to know more of the reactions of the audiences, of the press. How did you manage the crisis in the end?
Por otro lado,
And besides, I would like to know, who do you think is going to follow up on the classical type of theatre in France? Could you explain where the classical theatre in France is being held other than Avignon?
sur la crise,
About the crisis, it's all about the Yann Fabre and Maltimonier shows that were on show. It was no longer theatre, and that's what I think triggered the whole crisis. And there are two ways of approaching theatre. I don't know what it's like in Spain. I think that the two types of viewpoints could coexist. There are those who think that theatre is classical art, it's a heritage, that it has to be transmitted as it is. And then there are those who say that theatres are a venue for research, experiences, and when they are performed at the Court of Honor of the Palace, it's for 2,000 audience, so we can't do something too flashy or different. And yet we came the crisis. It was very much the press. The press sometimes becomes inflamed and makes a mountain out of a whole molehill. I don't think that was the case, really. And we received the help of a philosopher that we had invited. A book, sort of a pamphlet against what had happened in 2005. In the pamphlet, he mentioned that he had come to Avignon in the 1950s, and people were performing with nice robes and flowers, that things had changed. But after all, the world has changed. And the attacks were issuing from a sort of a nostalgic viewpoint. What do they want? To have a copy every year, a photocopy of the previous year? That was totally against what we had been mandated to do, that was to make something different. And of course we engaged in discussions with the audiences. We held many meetings with the audiences, with the public in 2005. And everyone had the opportunity to express their ideas, and some people actually said that they were there to see something different. Others were more stagnated in the past. Some people, after all, might change their mind. That's what it's all about. But after all, the idea was, why were they so angry? What was that made you so angry? What is that is so sacred that you think should not be touched? Because we're not here to destroy anything. So every year there are also elements of classical theatre. But the interesting thing is also to approach new challenges, to open up the opportunity for new authors, for new... I don't know if I have replied to your question.
¿Alguna otra cosa por ahí? Sí.
Hola. Bueno, yo estuve...
I went years ago, and I was surprised to see how the artists first make a presentation of their show in the morning, and how the whole city is involved in the festival. And also the fact that the popes lived in Avignon. This has a cultural element. If it were elsewhere, perhaps the festival would not have been held, although it may have started. It's as if we were to hold a festival here in Santiago. It has an international reference. So I think it's interesting to see that it was born there so many years ago, and that it has maintained itself for so many years too.
Oui, moi j'ai été frappée quand je suis venue ici.
I was surprised when I came here to the City of Culture. I find it an incredible place to hold a festival, but it's difficult to live here. It has large spaces, small spaces, it has things that assemble, things that divide. And so there are parallelisms between Santiago and Avignon regarding centuries of history, marked by, in this case, the pilgrimage to St. James. After all, in Avignon, the people who attend the festival are called pilgrims too. So these are interesting aspects that could be taken into account to revisit the history. Yesterday, over dinner, I found lots of people had studied history. I think it's not gratuitous. It may be seen as a bit of a radical thing. We have never thought that we have broken apart from anything. It was important for us right from the beginning to see how we approach creation, but how do we make it popular? Because popular culture is now television, and after all, we're trying to target similar audiences, but from a different viewpoint. We don't have pop artists in theatre. The popular artists now are the TV presenters, no longer classic artists or cinema artists, I think.
Hola, bom dia.
Good morning. I'm interested. You spoke about the relationship with the university, with the School of Sociology. Could you explain to us how this relationship started? Because the Festival of Avignon as a social phenomenon drew the attention of the university. Was it the university who took the initiative, or were you the ones to come into contact with the university to get some aid from them, from research from them? Could you also comment on what the benefits has been for the festival organizers from this relationship with the university? It's difficult to explain. There is a long history, and we don't really know who really started this all. What is clear is that the University of Avignon is a small university. However, it has soon focused on two specializations, one agriculture and one culture, that are connected to the two major industrial activities of Avignon. And the current chairman of the university, Manuel Letis, is a sociologist, and he is specialized in the sociology of festivals. And at the same time, I think that there is also there was a commission by the Ministry of Culture to research into the festivals of Cannes and Avignon and their audiences. Obviously, the connection with the university has many different aspects. It's very important for any cultural organization to also have this support. When we speak about Jean Fabre, they've had some studies on him. Obviously, we had the involvement of many government officials from the world of culture. And many things are done with the students too, although it's difficult because the festival takes place in July. And another problem is during the festival it's very expensive to rent property. People rent their homes and go and sleep at friends' places. This is a new business. So all the students have to leave their flats, their apartments in the month of July, because these are re-rented to the people who come to the festival. This is also a bit of a problem. After all, the festival does mean a lot in terms of money for the city of Avignon. As to the other benefits, well, the university, it can do things with the students all the year round. There's a French filmmaker, Christophe Honoré, I'm not sure if you know him, he's a filmmaker, and he has hosted two plays on the movement around the 1950s of French writers such as Marguerite Duras, Nathalie Sarraute and others. And this play aimed at being playful and accessible to students. That's why he wanted to work with students. And so the students became correspondents with the actors to dialogue and research and to provide some input. It's this kind of things that the university does, and all of this has been possible because at the local level the festival was there and tapped into this, involving the university also in the creative process by also integrating their competencies. This is also very important and complementary to the festival.
¿Alguna cosa más? ¿No? Ven, me permitir que pregunte.
So allow me to ask for a question. I'm going to ask you a question. You have given us a detailed account of the old standing festival of Avignon that is young and new. You spoke a lot about Avignon. But I think Avignon also builds bridges and is in dialogue with other festivals. I think we would all be interested in knowing more about this initiative that started in 2010, Le Voyage something, through the support of the BNP Paribas Foundation. The Festival of Aviñón in the last few years has been involved in the Teorema project that has been reflecting on how to build bridges between the younger generation of artists of the Eastern European bloc countries of the Western countries. This program enables the festival to find its place within the construction of the European project. And I think that's also something interesting. In 2004 it was very important for us to start with an associate artist from Germany when we presented the program in 2004 in Aviñón. And in the room, well, someone said, this is the last time that we have so many Germans in the room. Well, perhaps we also find some usefulness in that. For us, it's important to pursue these matters, and also that the Euro-Mediterranean question also be developed further, and because we share common problems. So we have met with 4 festivals with similar problems to ours. The festival in Barcelona, the one in Istanbul, the one in Epidores, and the one in Aviñón. The idea is to also become involved with other festivals, but it's also an issue of knowledge and joint work. While we have other problems that are common, such as being held in the summer, being held in historic heritage venues, and we would like to be involved in a European-wide project that is not easy. And one important thing is to build the artists for tomorrow, and we offer many shows in our festivals. It would be interesting if we also invite some 10 young artists per year from other cities in the Mediterranean to come and attend our shows, and so they will see what's different, and that will help them in their education, and also give them a different way of viewing things. Things are different, things may sound shocking, but in any case there are very strong affinities among these artists, and we have looked for the way to do that, and that's through the BNP Paribas Foundation that has helped with the funding. And the principle is that every year there's a group of 10 youths that attend these other festivals. So it's one year Aviñón in Istanbul, another year Barcelona, Athens, and we've been doing it for 4 years with young artists who are sort of sponsored by older artists. These are artists that we know. We ask them if you know younger artists who might be interested in spending the week in the festival.
Donc on verra si on a trouvé les...
So maybe we have found the artists of tomorrow, maybe not, we don't know.
Mais, cito alguna cosa. Ben, Hortense, gracias por la...
Thank you very much, Hortense, for this lesson of cultural action and territory. Thank you for this lesson on mediation between creators and specialized audiences and the greater audiences. So we now have 20 minutes for coffee, and then we shall learn more about another festival, the festival in Mérida, from the hand of its director, Jesus Cimarro.